In this video, I'm going to take some normal, unsuspecting dinosaur model kits and convert them into a legendary medieval dinosaur army. And it might get a little ridiculous, but I hope you enjoy. This video is sponsored by KiwiCo. In my last video, I showed you all a trick for how I clean my hobby mat. It was supposed to be a joke, but I'll do it again without the trick photography. It was just a different mat altogether. Some of you might remember this Brachiosaurus with a howdah from a few months ago. Well, I decided it was time to complete the set, and I nearly cleaned out the entire dinosaur section at my local hobby store. One of the first things you might notice is that these are model kits in 1:35 scale, not wargaming minis in a wargaming scale. You know what? That's a great observation. It's one that I am purposefully deciding to overlook for the sake of having a cooler army. Let's just say that a full-sized catapult would be a little too big to fit on the back of a Triceratops. Once the kits had been unwrapped and unboxed, it was time to assess the situation. Many of these are actually sold as completable diorama sets, featuring multiple small additional figures alongside the large one that's advertised on the box art. It's cool that they come with all these extra bits, like trees and bones and rocks and other things to spice up your diorama, if that's how you want to use them. Most of the kits in the collection came with the same quality of detail, but in the case of the Stegosaurus, it was noticeably thicker and less refined. You can kind of see it here in the skin texture. I don't normally see a big difference in Tamiya kits from one to the next. Maybe this one's a little older. Grown-up Ducky here, on the other hand, had all the fine detail from Tamiya that I'm used to, as did the rest of the model kits, for that matter. The Ducky box also came with some pterodactyls in it, which will make fun, small flying additions to my army as well. After that, I opened up the Petrie box. In case you weren't familiar, Petrie, from the land before time, is supposed to be a pteranodon. I glued the head on at a slight angle and patched the gap with super glue, and next up were the Chasmosauruses. Sauruses? As well as two velociraptors that came in the Triceratops box. After I had put together the Triceratops, I moved to the box of velociraptors. In total, I ended up with 8 of them. The last dinosaur to assemble was, of course, the main attraction of most dinosaur-themed things, and that is the T-Rex. I'm not sure if you know this, but one way to tell the difference between a T-Rex and a crocodile is whether the bottom teeth are visible when their mouth is closed. Now that I'm done assembling the dinosaurs, let's take a look at all the extra goodies that came in the boxes. First up, we've got some time-traveling dinosaur enthusiasts from all over the world. I got some fish and reptiles I'm looking forward to using in future dioramas, some trees and plants I don't recognize, as well as a bunch of alternate dinosaur parts that I did not use. The boxes also came with these diorama bases. I like the details on these and didn't want them to go to waste, but the goal here is to have a playable proxy army for a tabletop wargame. So I needed smaller, rounder bases. So I picked up these canvas discs for the larger ones, and for the smaller dinosaurs, I'll be using these standard-sized gaming bases that I bought online. And once everyone had a nice round or oval base to stand on, it was time to begin the basing. Like I said 24 seconds ago, I wanted to be able to use some of the details from these existing bases, so I traced out some circles and brought those over to my bandsaw. I cut out a couple discs and a few more details, did a little bit of trimming to make sure everything would fit where I needed it, and then I began gluing those details down to the bases. I thought about going into a lot more depth and detail on these bases, like I did with my Gundam Assemble minis, but most of the dinosaurs needed fairly flat surfaces to stand on, and so as not to make this project way longer than it needed to be, I kept them fairly simple. I'll also be adding earthy terrain texture to everything a little later on, which will make them look a lot better as well. After the big dinosaurs, I threw the small ones on their bases, which were the raptors and the pterodactyls. 2 of the flying critters got standoffs to give them some elevation, and that was all my little dinosaurs on bases. Speaking of little dinosaurs, my son is a dinosaur fan, and I invited him into the studio wearing his dinosaur hoodie to help me talk about some cool new toys that were sent to him by this week's sponsor, KiwiCo. KiwiCo generously sent us a number of boxes, including a panda crate, which is perfect for his age range, because he's still working on some basics, like colors, fruits, and animals. What is this?
Apple.
What is this? KiwiCo brings the excitement of science, engineering, and art directly to your door through fun, hands-on projects. They're very intentional about creating things that encourage learning and exploration, which is something that I greatly value. Growing up, I benefited from playing with toys that prompted creativity and problem solving, and I want my son to be able to do the same. These products fit perfectly in line with that. And just to clarify, not everything that they send me was for my kid. I looked through KiwiCo's catalog of products for older children and found a lot of things that I personally wanted to put together. I asked for 2 of them that had elements of things that I've wanted to integrate into dioramas of mine. So putting these together was very educational. If you're looking for high quality, wholesome, creativity-inspiring gifts for your kids or grandkids or any kids for that matter, I would personally recommend KiwiCo. You can also give extra support to this channel and get 50% off your first monthly crate and 20% off your first Panda crate by using the code BOILEYE at checkout. Go to kiwico.com/boileye or follow the link below. What do you think? Ooh. Thank you, KiwiCo, for sponsoring today's video. The next step in the dino journey was to patch up the most blatant seam lines using Tamiya putty. Didn't work perfectly, but it did hide most of what I was hoping to. After the worst of the lines had been covered with putty, it was time to throw down some dirt. And by dirt, I mean Sculptamold and water, mixed roughly at the suggested ratio on the packaging. One of the other reasons I decided to keep the bases relatively simple was because the Brachiosaurus that started this whole thing is also on a very simple base. Actually, it only got Sculptamold with no other decorations. So, by comparison, the rest of these are quite well decorated. For all the small gaming bases, all I used was some mud effects from Vallejo, which worked just fine to transition the rocks into the base. After the Velociraptors, I gave the same treatment to the Pterodactyls, and while these bases are drying, I decided I could finally move on to what I had been most excited for, and that was turning these dinosaurs into siege weapons. I recently got a little catapult and a ballista in a care package from a patron of mine, Jehan, Lord of Cats. I'll show more of the contents of that box in a future video, but it was a very thoughtful gift. Thanks again for that, Jehan. The box arrived at just the right time because I had already decided to pair these dinosaurs with a medieval theme. I found the catapult and ballista in approximately the right scale. Not necessarily the right scale for the dinosaurs, but close enough to the scale of the human figures that it will look like it makes sense. And that's really all that matters when it comes to fantasy. It doesn't have to be realistic, it just has to look like it makes sense. And what makes sense is for this catapult to have a human crew that operates it. So I also needed a platform for those humans to stand on, and for that I'll be using some basswood strips. Sometimes I construct these things on the fly, sometimes I pre-plan them and construct them and then attach them later, but one thing I've found is that just gluing it together and then snipping off the excess is a really efficient way to work. To mount the platform to the dinosaur, I needed some kind of a harness, and for that I'm going to be using a painting drop cloth with a plastic backing. This solves my #1 issue with working with fabric in scale modeling, and that is that super glue gets all over my fingers because it seeps through the fabric. If there's a plastic backing on one side, that's no longer an issue. I also glued some twine on to make these look like nice thick ropes, and then I glued the catapult in place. Catapult also has these hooks on the front. I'm not sure what they're for, but I used it as an extra harness to go around the Triceratops' neck. Additionally, I wanted to have some flags on this thing, so I used some 040 styrene, cut out the basic shape of the flags, and then to get them to look wavy, I held them over a heat gun, wiggled them into position, and with that the catapult was done. It was time to move on to the ballista. And I'll be putting the ballista on the larger of the 2 Chasmosauruses. I chose the Triceratops and the Chasmosaurus because they have these nice built-in shields on the front, so the crew feels a little bit more safe. I proceeded to make a platform and harness for the ballista, and a ballista is not to be confused with a barista. Barista is like a lawyer, I think. We don't really have those in the US though. We do have the ones that make coffee though. We do have those kind of baristas. After the Chasmosaurus, it was time to move on to the knights, and for that I'll be using these boxes of Perry miniatures. Perry miniatures are great and in the perfect scale that I was looking for. So I got 2 boxes of them, and then I broke them out and began prepping them to sit on some dinosaurs. They were obviously supposed to be sitting on horses, not dinosaurs. These dinosaurs were far narrower. Luckily I still had my heat gun out, so I got those legs nice and toasty. Once they were malleable, I could bend them around the dinosaur and when they cooled off, they would stay in the right position. For the captain of this little raptor cavalry division, I decided to do something special. I took the face armor from a horse that came with the knights, and it just so happened to be the perfect size to fit on the raptor as well. So I did a little bit of slicing and dicing, and then some reconstructive surgery. I was really happy with what I ended up with. I gave the raptor some additional armor and a flag for the spear of the captain, and then it was time to move on to the baby Chasmosaurus, who was going to just have a single spearman on his back and some armor upgrades. But off camera, I decided to add an archer as well, because I felt like just the one spearman by himself wasn't enough. And there was a little spot there, a perfectly fine spot for one more person to ride on. Also flipped the spear around so it was pointing the other direction, and then it was time to move on to the Pteranodon. This pointy-faced bat got an archer on his back, as well as plenty of extra ammunition. Felt like it would be quite annoying to have to land every time you needed a refill, so let's make those few and far between. For the Perilla Falafel-saurus, I wanted to have some archer-filled saddlebags, but I also needed a little saddle for the driver. To make belts, straps, and slings, I've found that squeezing thin styrene rods with some pliers is a really helpful way to flatten it out. After the saddle had been strapped in place, I followed the same harness technique using more drop cloth. I made 2 narrow platforms for the soldiers to stand on as well. These platforms were unique from the others in that I decided to add little cloth sides to them, to give the archers in them a little bit more safety, or at least the illusion of a little bit more safety. I'm not sure how much fabric would keep you from falling out. Then I glued the archers in place. The Stegosaurus is basically an armored vehicle as is, so all I did was add a rider, and then it was finally time to move on to the T-Rex. For the T-Rex, I wanted to do something special, and I asked myself, what is fit for the back of the king of dinosaurs, but the king of siege equipment, the trebuchet? In case you're not familiar, the trebuchet was a type of catapulting siege engine with a sling on one end of a pivoting arm. There are 2 types, the traction and counterweight trebuchet. While counterweight trebuchets have greater power and range than traction trebuchets, that's probably because they were being tugged on by people, not a dinosaur. This traction trebuchet can be fired by the dino captain, giving the signal, and then the T-Rex drops its head real quickly, pointed in the direction of its target. One thing I didn't account for while I was building this was ammo storage and reloading. So I didn't put a human crew on the back, but we can figure that out later. I'm pretty happy with what I came up with here, and I'm going to be calling it the Trebuchurus Rex. Some other names that I thought of are listed on the screen right now. If you like those better, vote on them in the comments. With that, my little army of kit-bashed dinosaurs had been constructed, and it took a moment to look at just how fun and ridiculous it was. And up next, it was time to paint. Unfortunately, partway through filming that, I ran out of spray paint primer, so I had to switch to the airbrush to prime the rest. Priming with the airbrush went real quick because all the larger models had already been finished with the spray paint. Once dry, it was time to apply my shadow color, which is purple, applied directly over the black. I used this purple shadow color for all of the miniatures, and you can see it building up on my hobby mat back there. And once the shadows had been applied, I began applying the midtones. Admittedly, I did not plan out this paint job as well as I could have, so I was jumping around from piece to piece, remixing paint for colors I had already used before. Eventually, I got everything built up to a brightness that I was happy with. I also gave all of the soldiers and siege engine crew members a zenithal highlight with the lightest iteration of that wood color I was using. After all the airbrushed highlights on the wood details and the humans were applied, I switched over to the green tones, which I put on the Trebuchurus and the Parasaurolophus. I repeated the process with every color, lightening it and lightening it until I had an almost white version of the color that I had started with. Did that with all of the dinosaurs and the colors that I chose to paint them in. For the raptors, I chose blue. In my Brachiosaurus video, I got a few questioning comments about the color choice for the skin. I painted it blue, and it's valid. It's a valid question. But my question is, how do we know the Brachiosaurus wasn't blue? I certainly can't tell from the bones. And also, in that video, it was wearing a howdah filled with people who were not the right scale, which honestly, in my opinion, is more of a concern when it comes to realism. But I decided that I wanted all these dinosaurs to have fun, bright colors that set them apart from each other on the table. My temptation is usually to go with more of a realistic color scheme, and then I end up with just a lot of murky brown and green. Luckily for us, realism doesn't matter on an army of medieval dinosaur riding knights. After the Pteranodon, the heavy lifting of the airbrush was done, and it was time to break out the wet palette and do all the finer brush work. Part of my inspiration for having knights on these dinosaurs was because of the tale of St. George, who apparently slayed a dragon. But what if it actually wasn't a dragon, but a dinosaur? And what if years later dinosaurs had been discovered in large number and domesticated and tamed? They would 100% be used as war animals. Maybe not in the modern era with drones and rockets, so knights and dinosaurs felt like the right combination to me. And I definitely thought about putting cowboys on these dinosaurs. Let's just save that for another time. Another comment that I got a lot in my Brachiosaurus video was that it reminded people of Dinotopia, created by James Gurney. I had never heard of Dinotopia before, so I went and I looked it up, and I was really impressed with the work. I haven't watched the miniseries, but I looked through the artwork, and I love it. It's awesome. James also has an impressive art channel that I've been watching. You should definitely check that out as well. For all the metal bits, I went with a true metallic metal, which I gave some colorful glazes to make a little bit more interesting. It's a quick and efficient way to use my painting time. I moved from mini to mini, painting it to completion. I don't know if you can hear in the background the crickets outside. It was getting pretty late, so I may go back and do some touching up later on some of these details, but I'm pretty happy with the way that these turned out. The last dinosaur to paint was the T-Rex, and one of the elements that I painted that I was not happy with were the eyes on the T-Rex. Painted it a couple times and I was not happy with the way it looked. It looked a little goofy every time to me. So that's an element that I am going to be returning to at some point in the future after I have brushed up on my eye painting skills. After some brushed on highlights on the wood and some final details like the flags on the side of the T-Rex, the painting was done. It was time to wrap these things up. Like I've mentioned a couple times, the first base that I made is very simple, but I like it. I'm going to use some clay pigment powder to make all the rest of the bases match. I painted all of the bases with the pigment powder mixed with water and made sure to build that up on the legs and the feet as well, to give all these miniatures a nice traveled look to them. When all of the bases had been properly dusted, I got the whole crew together and it was ready to go on the table. After that, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.